Welcome to the course on church history. I'm Dr. Stephen Myers. I'm with the Institute for Biblical and Scientific Studies. And you get a lot more courses, information, charts we use at www.bibleandscience.com. In the background, you can see the great Church of Sophia in Istanbul. In this church history course, we want an overview of church history starting at the very beginning, the birth of the church in Acts chapter 2, and then going all the way up to the present time. We won't spend much time on the book of Acts because that's also covered in the session on Here is a good overview of church history. They all start with P's to help you remember. First, we have Pentecost, when we have the birth of the church, the apostolic age. Then we have persecution, around 64 to 313 A.D. Then we have the political union of church and state, starting with Constantine. Then we have the Pope's power and prosperity. Then we have the Protestant Reformation, 1517 A.D. And then we have Pietism and revivals from the 16th to 20th century. And then lastly we have postmodernism in the 21st century. So we want a quick overview of church history. The apostolic age, the book of Acts, from 33 to 64 AD. The key verse for the book of Acts is chapter 1, verse 8. It tells us to go into Judea, Samaria, and the uttermost parts of the earth with the gospel. And so this is a good outline for the book of Acts. You have Judea, Acts chapter 1 through 7. We have the birth of the church in Acts chapter 2. We have Stephen being stoned in Acts chapter 7. And from this stoning, it scatters the church into Samaria, and then we have Paul's missionary journeys going into the uttermost parts of the earth Acts 13 through 28. Here we have a nice chart of the overview of church history in the book of Acts in the New Testament. First of all, we have the life of Christ in the Gospels. Then we have church history in the book of Acts. And during this time, there's a number of epistles or letters that are written. There are the Pauline epistles written by Paul, and then there are the general epistles written by others like Peter, Jude, James, and John. Now here, the book of Acts, we have the beginning of the church in Jerusalem. And then we have Paul's missionary journeys. And during these journeys, he wrote these different books. We have the prison epistles while he was in prison in Rome. In Ephesians, Colossians, Philemon, and Philippians. We have the pastoral epistles, which we believe Paul was freed from jail, and he wrote to Timothy and Titus. And then we have the book of Revelation. A key event in church history is the beginning of the persecution of Christians in 64 A.D. This is the first imperial persecution. Nero blames the Christians for the burning of Rome in 64 A.D. And Christians are used as torches to light Nero's garden. It's believed that Nero needed more room, so he had part of Rome burnt, and he blamed it on the Christians. Famous saying, the blood of the martyrs was the seed of the church. Christians were forced to live in the catacombs of Rome. And finally, Paul was beheaded in Rome about 67, 68 A.D. Another key, very important, was the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 A.D. by Titus. This caused the scattering of the Jews and Christians around the world. And as a result of this, Christianity is spread throughout the Roman Empire. There was the first Jewish revolt, and resulted in Vespasian coming, and then he had to go back to Rome to become emperor, and Titus was left to destroy Jerusalem. A key event. A key writer, person at this time was Josephus. He was a Jewish historian born about 37 A.D. During the first Jewish revolt, which was from 66 to 70 A.D., he was captured and taken to Rome, where he wrote the Jewish Wars about the first Jewish revolt, the antiquity of the Jews from the creation to the fall at Masada, and against Ephraim, who defended Jews against pagan slander. He gives valuable information about the New Testament and early church background. Here we have the writings of the Apostolic Fathers or early church fathers. From the ones I just mentioned, we have the epistles of Clement of Rome, the letters to the Corinthians. We have the 7 epistles of Ignatius to the Smyrnians, Polycarp, the Ephesians, Magnesiums, Philadelphians, Tertullians, and Romans. Then we have the epistle of Polycarp. We have the martyrdom of Polycarp. The Didache, some of the earliest teachings of the early church fathers. This is a key writing. Then we have the epistle of Barnabas, the shepherd of Hermas. Both of these are in the right next to the New Testament. In other words, some even consider these to be part of the New Testament. The epistle of Ignatius and the fragments of papyrus. These are some of the key writings of the early church fathers. A key discovery was the Nag Hammadi Library, or Gnostic Gospels. They were discovered in 1945 near the town of Nag Hammadi in Upper Egypt. There were 12 leather-bound papyrus codices sealed in a jar. The most famous of these is the Gospel of Thomas, containing 114 sayings of Jesus. They are now housed in the Coptic Museum in Cairo, Egypt. And these tell us a lot more about Gnosticism and what they believed, these Nag Hammadi texts. The last persecution was under Diocletian, and it was the worst, and that was in around 303 A.D. We now come to the third part in church history. First we have Pentecost, the birth of the church in the apostolic age. Second, we have the time of persecution of Christians. And now we come to the third, the political union of church and state. This is roughly 313 to 476 A.D. Constantine's victory over Maximinus at the Battle of Milvian Bridge resulted in his conversion to Christianity in 312 A.D. It was said that Constantine saw this vision of a cross in the sky, which some think was a meteorite. And he said, "By this sign we shall conquer." And so they painted crosses on all their shields and went out into battle and won the battle. Constantine issues the Edict of Milan in 313 A.D., which stopped the persecution of the Christians. Constantine the Great becomes the head of the church. And here is a coin with a picture of him on it. So we have the political union of the church and state with Constantine. In 323 A.D., Constantine becomes the sole emperor, and he moves the capital from Rome to Constantinople, which is now modern-day Istanbul. Here is a summary of the key church councils. We have the very first Council of Nicaea in 325 A.D. They gave us the Apostles' Creed, or the Nicene Creed. Then we have the Council of Constantinople in 381 A.D., which called the question of Christ's deity. Athanasius versus Arius. Is Jesus God, or is he just a man? Then we have the Council of Chalcedon in 451, that Jesus is indeed perfect God, yet a perfect man. Then we have a summary of all these earlier councils, help to clarify who was Jesus, Christology. The conclusion that these councils reached was Jesus was fully human, yet fully divine or God, the second person of the Holy Trinity. Another very important great leader of the church was Saint Augustine of Hippo, lived from 354 to 430 A.D. He wrote Confessions and The City of God. These were one of his two key works, plus he wrote many other works. He was a great theologian and formed the doctrine of the church. Another key leader was Jerome, 345 to 430 AD. And what he did was he translated the Old and New Testament into Latin, called the Vulgate. He was famous for translating this Vulgate, a Latin translation of the Bible, which is the official Bible of the Roman Catholic Church. Now we want to review here. We have church history. We have the beginning at Pentecost. We have the Apostolic Fathers. Then we have a great persecution of the church, the early church fathers. Then we come to the end of persecution with Constantine, political union of church and state. And then our fourth division here, we have the rise of the Pope's power and prosperity from 476 to 1517 AD. The Pope's rise to power fills the vacuum of the fall of Rome in 476 AD. Kings must get their approval from the Pope. This begins with Pope Gregory the Great. By the 5th century, ecclesiastical hierarchy developed. There were the 5 primary pentarchs, pentarch meaning 5. There was 5 key cities and 5 key bishops of these cities. We have, first of all, Rome because of its power, Constantinople, Alexandria, Antioch, and Jerusalem. These were all key cities, wealthy cities, important cities when it comes. Then there was a spirit of revival of new monastic orders. There was the order of Saint Benedict, monastery at Monte Cassino in Italy, started by Benedict of Nursia in 529 AD. The Cistercians, founded by Robert of Mulsing in 1098, to return to the literal observance of the rule of Benedict. Bernard of Clairvaux was the most influential Christian of his day, around 1090 to 1153 AD. And then we have Francis of Assisi, 1182 to 1226 AD. He turned his back on worldly goods. These were the key leaders of the monastic order. Mendicants or friars are members of religious communities under monastic rule, but instead of staying in the monasteries, they emphasize public missionary works like preaching, teaching, while taking vows of poverty and chastity and obedience. Francis of Assisi, he turned his back on worldly goods and founded the Franciscans. This is 1182 to 1226 AD. Then we have Dominic of Osma in 1170 to 1221, founder of the Dominicans, an order Another major event was the rise of Islam. Muhammad was born around 570 A.D. and retired to a cave where supposedly the angel Gabriel commanded him to be the true prophet of Allah. He was driven from Mecca. He fled to Medina in 622, where he raised an army and came back and conquered Mecca. They went on also to conquer Arabia, North Africa, Palestine, Persia, and Asia Minor. Muhammad's successors are called caliphs, meaning successors. Their main belief is there is but one God, Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. We want to go back now to 1800, when Charlemagne, known as Charles the Great, at a mass on Christmas Day in 1800 in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, Pope Leo III crowned Charlemagne as emperor, which revived the Byzantine emperor of Constantinople. He helped define Western Europe and the Middle Ages. It was called the Holy Roman Empire. We now come to the Great Schism that split the Eastern Church from the Western Church. There have been growing tensions between the Eastern Church and the Western Church since the 4th century. In 1054, this is the date for the beginning of the Great Schism of the Western Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church, and climaxed with the sacking of Constantinople by the Fourth Crusade in 1204 A.D. Inquisitions, sort of a bad part of church history. The Episcopal and Papal Inquisitions evolved to combat the popular rise of the Cathars and Waldensians. The medieval Inquisition was a special court with powers to judge intentions and actions considered heresy by the Roman Catholic Church. There was an investigation, a trial, torture, and punishment. Punishment was carried out by civil authorities. Pope Innocent IV in 1252 issued a papal bull, ad extremata, that authorized torture by inquisitioners. Many inquisitioners were Dominic monks. The most famous Inquisition was the Spanish Inquisition. The same king and queen that sent Columbus to the New World, Ferdinand II and Isabel I, carried out the Spanish Inquisition, which was not under papal control as earlier ones, but under direct control of the monarch. Because of persecution, many Jews converted. Ferdinand II started the Inquisition to stop false conversion by Jews to Christianity. Later it was used to stop the spread of Protestants. Lists of indexes were produced listing prohibited books, especially any Bible translations, into the vernacular. The Crusades, another low point in church history. There were 9 major crusades to take back the Holy Land. The first crusade was in 1095 to 1099. There was the siege of Jerusalem. There was a crusade also of 1101. The second crusade, 1147 to 1149. The third crusade, 1187 to 1192. The fourth crusade, 1202 to 1204. The Albigensian Crusade, the Children's Crusade. Then we have the Fifth Crusade, 1217 to 1221. The Sixth Crusade, 1228 to 1229. The Seventh Crusade, 1248 to 1254. The Eighth Crusade, 1270. And Ninth Crusade, 1271 to 12. At the same time, we had the rise of universities. Modern Western universities had their origins in the medieval church. They began as cathedral schools and eventually became partially separated from the cathedrals and then formed their own institutions. The earliest being the University of Paris in 1150 and the University of Oxford in 1096. Thomas Aquinas lived from 1225 to 1274 AD. He was the greatest scholastic theologian of the Middle Ages. His most famous book is Summa Theologica. In 1270, the Bishop of Paris, and later became the Bishop of Oxford, condemned his teaching, which used reason, which went against Augustine. 50 years later, he was made a saint. We now come to the Renaissance. The Renaissance, 1399 to 1599, was a period of great cultural change and achievement. Famous artists Michelangelo, Raphael, Donatello, and Da Vinci. This is the time when St. Peter's Basilica was built. One important man was Erasmus of Rotterdam, 1467 to 1536. There was a renewed interest in classical studies. The study of Greek and Hebrew led to the study of the Bible in the original languages, paving the way for the Reformation. Erasmus of Rotterdam in Holland, one of the greatest humanists, prepared the first edition of the Greek New Testament, which was printed in 1516 at Basel. He wrote best-selling satires, the Colloquies, and Praise of Folly. The Renaissance renewed interest in the classical studies of the New Testament written in original Greek. Erasmus prepared the Greek edition of the New Testament, which is the basis for the Textus Receptus. The invention of the printing press in 1455 was made by Gutenberg. The first book printed was the Bible. The printing press was the key to the spread of the Reformation. We want to look at the pre-Reformation leaders. There was Peter Waldo and his followers, the Waldensians, in 1175. We have William of Ockham in 1290 to 1349 AD. He called for reform in the Roman Catholic Church. He rejected papal authority. He was a skilled writer. Today we still use the principle named after him, Occam's razor, which is the simplest explanation, is usually the best explanation. Then we have John Wycliffe, born in England in 1324. He translated the Latin Bible into English in 1388. He opposed the Pope in paying taxes and in doctrine. He is called the Morning Star of as head of the Church of England. He was excommunicated by Pope Paul III. Later, under King Edward the Sixth, reform was instituted by Thomas Cranmer. Reform was cut short when Queen Mary I, also called Bloody Mary, tried to reform the church and return it under papal control. Many were burned for refusing to recant. The Church of England, as we saw, was started by King Henry VIII, splitting away from the Roman Catholic Church because he wanted an annulment. But there was two groups in the Church of England. The Puritans wanted to reform the Church of England. John Bunyan wrote Pilgrim's Progress, published in 1678. He also penned Grace Abounding to the Chief of Sinners in 1666 and The Holy War in 1682. There's an online library where you can read John Bunyan's books. Then we had the Separatists who wanted to separate from the Church of England. And these were the Pilgrims that finally came to America in 1620. So we have two groups in the Church of England. The Puritans who wanted to reform the church, and the Separatists who wanted to separate out from the church and start their own. John Bunyan, 1628 to 1688, was a Puritan who wanted to reform the Church of England. John Bunyan wrote Pilgrim's Progress while he was in prison for preaching without a license. The first part was published in 1678 and the second part in 1684. He also penned Grace Abounding to the Chief of Sinners, The Life and Death of Mr. Badman, and The Holy War. He was imprisoned twice. Besides the Bible, Pilgrim's Progress is the most read and sold book. Many translations of the Bible appeared in English. We have the first one, William Tyndale, New Testament in 1525. See William Tyndale's Gallery and the Tyndale Society. But he's the first one to take the Bible from the original Greek and translate it into English. And most of the other Bibles are translations that we see here are the result and mainly the work of William Tyndale. Miles Coverdale in 1535, he did the Old Testament. And we have the Matthew Bible, 1537. We have the Great Bible of 1539, which is a revision of the Matthew Bible by Coverdale. Then we have the famous Geneva Bible of 1560, which became very popular with its Calvinistic notes. And this was the Bible used by the Pilgrims. Then we have the Bishop's Bible of 1568. Then we have the Reims Douay Bible from Latin Catholic version. Then we have the King James Bible, 1611. This was requested by the Puritans, but the Geneva Bible remained more popular for another 50 years. Because of the Protestant Reformation, we have a counter-Reformation by the Roman Catholic Church. Ignatius of Loyola founded the Society of Jesus, or the Jesuits, in 1540. Their first and greatest missionary was Francis Xavier, 1502 to 1552, who worked in India, Indonesia, and Japan. The Council of Trent, called by Pope Paul III, it met for 3 sessions, 1545, 1551, 1562. In 1564, the Tridentine Index was published, which listed books Catholics were forbidden to read, which was kept until 1966. Henry VIII became the defender of the faith against Martin Luther, but when the Pope delayed in granting him a divorce, he split from Rome. Cardinal Wolsey, in the great public display in London, had all the books of Luther burned. King Henry got Parliament to pass the Bloody Act that made Protestantism illegal and punishable by death. When Mary, the daughter of Henry, and Catherine ascended to the throne, she tried to return England to Catholicism. The Bloody Act was reinforced, resulting in many Protestant leaders being cast into prison and over 900 of them burned at the stake, including Thomas Cranmer, Bishop Latimer, Ridley, and Hooper. Historians call her Bloody Mary. The 30 Years' War between the Protestants and the Catholics from 1618 to 1648. The Treaty of Westphalia in 1648 ended the 30 Years' War. Pope Innocent X renounced the treaty in 1651, but the Catholic armies were too exhausted to continue fighting. The most memorable of the Counter-Reformation by the Roman Catholic Church is the Inquisition. The most infamous is the Spanish Inquisition. There were earlier ones, but not until 1480 did Ferdinand and Isabella make the Spanish Inquisition a royal instrument with its center at Madrid. They are the same ones that backed Columbus' expedition in 1492. The Roman Inquisition began in 1542, which was controlled by the papacy. In France, the Huguenots were persecuted when Catherine of Medici came to the throne, and she plotted to destroy them. On Sunday night, August 23rd, 1572, there was the massacre of 30,000 Huguenots on St. Bartholomew's Day, and more in the days that followed. Many fled from France. The Age of Reason in the 17th century. We have science versus the church. Galileo Galilei came into conflict with the Roman Catholic Church over the Copernican astronomy. Galileo published Synodus and Nuncius in 1610, describing his observations with his new telescope, which told of 4 moons revolving around Jupiter, mountains on the moon, phases of Venus, and sunspots. The Bible clearly taught that the sun went around the earth, geocentrism, not the earth around the sun, heliocentrism. In 1632, he wrote Dialogues Concerning the Two Chief World Systems. Because of this book, Galileo was ordered to Rome to stand trial and then was sentenced in 1633. The Roman Catholic Church position was that geocentricity was taught in the Bible. They had Ecclesiastes 1:5, the sun also rises and the sun goeth down and hastens to its place where he arose. Joshua 10:13, so the sun stood still in the midst of heaven and hastened not to go down for about a whole day. Psalm 93:1, the world also established that it cannot be moved. So with these verses, the church said everything revolves around the earth. Martin Luther commented about Copernicus, saying, the fool, referring to Copernicus, would overturn all of astronomy. In the Holy Scriptures we read that Joshua ordained the sun to stand still, not the earth. Copernicus replies, to attack me by twisting a passage from Scripture is the resort to one who claims judgment upon things he does not understand. Galileo's conclusion is the Bible tells us how to go to heaven, not how the heavens go. We want to now look at an overview of all the church history we've covered so far. You can get copies of these charts on our website, BibleandScience.com. We want to review now. We have the beginning of the church at Pentecost. We have the apostolic age. We have the persecution of the early Christians. Then we have the political union. That was in 313 A.D. with Constantine, making it legal for Christians to practice their religion, and united the church with the state. We then have the rise of the popes and their power. We have a great schism between the Eastern Church and the Western Church. The Western Church would be the Roman Catholic Church. The Eastern, we have the Orthodox Church. We have Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, and Eastern Orthodox. We have another great schism in the West with the Protestant Reformation by Martin Luther in 1517, nailing the 95 Theses to the door of the Wittenberg Church. Martin Luther founded the Lutherans. The Moravians split off of the Lutherans with Count Zinzendorf. Some other great leaders of the Protestant Reformation was Zwingli. From Zwingli came the Anabaptist movement. From also the Mennonites. Another great leader, John Calvin, who founded the Reformation Church, the Reformed Church. Then we have another great leader, John Knox in Scotland, founding the Presbyterian Church. Then we see another split with Henry VIII not getting an annulment, so he splits from the Roman Catholic Church, with Cranmer leading the way. And under the Church of England here, we have two main groups, the Puritans who wanted to purify the Church of England. We have the Separatists who wanted to separate from the Church of England, and they did, and became pilgrims that came to America. And from these Separatists, there was several groups that formed. We have the Congregational Church. Mainly think of the Pilgrims. We have the Baptists with Roger Williams in Rhode Island. And we have split-offs from the Baptists. We have the Church of Christ. We have William Miller, who claimed Christ was coming back in 1845. We have the Seventh-day Adventists who split from that. Then we have another group of Methodists, John Wesley founding the Methodists, and a split off from the Methodists is the great Pentecostal movement. The Roman Catholics have several orders. We have the Francis of Assisi, the Dominicans, and the Jesuits. Then we have a whole trying to get them all back together again, the World Council of Churches. So this gives you a whole overview of church history and where some of the different denominations have come from. We now have some questions we want to review. The birth of the church occurred during what? Was it Christmas, Pentecost, Easter, Passover? The answer is Pentecost. That's when the church started in Acts chapter 2. Okay, here's another question to put in order the historic events in church history. Number one, we have the last persecution of Diocletian. That was in 303 AD. We have Saul's conversion. That will be number one. We have the destruction of Jerusalem. That was in 70 AD. We have 1st, 2nd Corinthians, Romans was written. That would be during his missionary journeys. Then we have Constantine was converted and took over the empire. That was in 312 AD. 1st and 2nd Thessalonians was written before 1st and 2nd Corinthians. Then we have the prison epistles. And then we have Nero blamed Christians for the burning of Rome. This was in 64 AD. Who is this a picture of? Is it Nero, Augustine, Constantine, or Diocletian? Actually, this is a coin of Diocletian, who persecuted the great persecution in 303 AD. Another true false. The early councils helped to clarify who Jesus was. This is true. They wanted to establish who was he just human? Was he God, part human, part God? And they came to the conclusion he's perfectly human and perfectly God. We want to complete the following sentence, fill in the blank. The Pope's rise to power to fill the vacuum of the fall of what? It was the fall of Rome in 476 AD. Because of the political power falling, the Pope was able to fill in the vacuum. Who was the prophet who contributed to the rise of Islam? That would be Muhammad. A short answer. Who did the Holy Roman Empire rise under? That would be Charlemagne or Charles the Great. How many crusades were there? 9, according to this course. Some people may put less, some may add more. What are the 5 points of Calvin? What's the key word to remember? Tulip. If you remember tulip, we have total depravity, unconditional election, limited atonement, irresistible grace, and preservation of the saints. Name the 3 key beliefs of the Protestant Reformation. It was the authority of the Bible only, saved by grace, and the priesthood of believers, praying directly to God. Match the event with a date. The 95 Theses nailed to the door of the Wittenberg Church. That happened in 1517. Galileo's Synodus Numicus. That was 1610. Muhammad fled to Medina, 622. The Edict of Milan, 313. Fall of the Roman Empire, 476. The Great Schism between the Eastern Church and the Western Church, 1054. These are the key dates to remember. Congratulations, you have finally completed the Church History Learning Module. I'm Dr. Stephen C. Myers. I'm with the Institute for Biblical and Scientific Studies, and you get more information, some of the charts and information you can get at www.bibleandscience.com. And thank you very much for taking the course.